Welcome to the Lowdown, our monthly series where we gather learned folk from the world of marketing together to dissect some common challenges. My name is Russell Parsons, Editor-in-Chief of Marketing Week, and I am your host. This month, we're going to be digging into innovation, the approach, process, and guide rails required to introduce incremental or breakthrough innovation. Over the next 45 minutes or so, we will discuss good and bad practice and hear success stories and cautionary tales from our esteemed panel. Let me introduce them. We have Helen Edwards, a renowned academic and Marketing Week columnist who has advised some of the world's most celebrated marketing organizations on innovation. Hello, Helen. We've got Anna Persaud, a former marketer at the likes of Christian Dior and Space NK, and now CEO of skin solutions company This Works. Hello to Anna. And John Evans, who you may know as the host of the blockbuster podcast, The Uncensored CMO, but has a day job as CCO of System One. Welcome, John. But let's crack on. And John, if I could start with you. I've heard a lot over the years about the need to create a culture of innovation. From your perspective, what does that mean practically? And perhaps if you can offer an example of where you have seen this work and why, either in organizations where you've worked or that you've admired from afar.
Yeah, thanks, Russell, and good morning, everybody. It's lovely to be here. Thanks so much for having me. Handily enough, I have recently done a podcast with a guy called Mauro Porcini, the absolutely inspirational guy, and he's Chief Design Officer at PepsiCo. And he's actually written this incredible book. If anyone's a bookworm out there that loves to read, it's called The Human Side of Innovation. And I genuinely recommend it because it's just magical. It's a magical book that just combines theory and practice and just oozes kind of somebody that's kind of been there and done it. So I will steal with pride, if I may, some of the kind of points that he makes and blend it in with my own experience. But there's a few things that I think are absolutely critical. The number one, and I think, Ritson would start anybody off in this place, is market orientation and being consumer led. And I think if I reflect over the times I've done innovation in my career, which has been quite a lot, actually, the closer I am to the customer, the easier it is to kind of have the ideas, but also know what's going to work. And I think some of the problems in big organizations is we become so separate from our customer that we start to sort of rely on reports and third-hand information, that kind of thing. So being customer-led, I think, is essential. And then I think the next thing is, and actually Mauro talks about this in his book, is combining dreaming with brilliant execution. And I think, we often come across people that are great at ideas, and there are people that are great at execution. You need to build the capability to do both. And I think that's an essential thing. And then there's this lovely phrase he used in the book, which just made me smile. And I'm sure everyone's going to resonate with this. He says, you're fighting the dictatorship of the normal. And if you think, organizations, categories, systems are all built to keep the status quo as it is. And I think in innovation, we underestimate how much we have to overcome that is sort of normal process, normal ways of doing things, normal budget setting, normal ways of thinking, and so on. So don't underestimate, as he calls it, the dictatorship of the normal. And the fourth thing, actually, which I think will resonate with a lot of people, is innovation is often about being quicker, learning more quickly, getting feedback soon, learning from that feedback and putting it back into practice. That's what innovators do. It's what entrepreneurs do brilliantly. They don't wait. They get out there, they test it, they learn, they feedback. And so I think having that is great. In a big organization, the fifth point I was going to make is it's so important to align the organization. Because often the thing with innovation is, I remember when I was at Britvic, people would say to me, oh, John, you've launched that innovation, but if we put Pepsi on a gondola end in Tesco, we'll beat your annual sales, in about 2 days, But the point is, what I was building is something that would work in the long term, that create incremental revenue, bring in new customers, incremental margin, add profit, add shareholder value. None of those things happen quickly. And so it's really important that you align the organization to the goal and make sure that there's that kind of incentives aligned. And then the final thing, which I think everybody needs, is patience. And I'll give you a little stat here, because I actually did a study of 10 years of innovation in soft drinks. Really fascinating. I took the top 20 innovation after 1 year and the top 20 innovations after 5 years. They're completely different. Most of the innovation, I say, that was successful in year 1, 50% of it had declined in year 2, 80% of it wasn't there after 5 years. And what I found is the ones that were successful after 5 years didn't even make the list in year 1. They started small, they owned a particular part of the market, and that they built up and kind of built mental availability and physical ability kind of in line with each other, rather than just sort of going big and then busting. So the patience you need to really get a breakthrough, it takes longer than you think. And everyone knows it, but nobody plans based on it. It drives me insane. You know this, right? Put it in your plan that it will take you longer than you think, and get everyone aligned to that. So that's the final point. If I'd done that in my career, it would have saved me a lot of heartache.
John made a couple of interesting points there about the need for patience, because these things take time, to have a mix of, I think, if I heard or understood you correctly, John, dreamers and pragmatists. That was my paraphrase of what you were saying, as opposed to what you actually said, but I think that's where you were getting at. On this question of culture, Anna, if I could just get your take on how you foster, how you encourage where you are, or perhaps reflecting on your previous experience.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you for inviting me today. It's a pleasure to be here. So protecting the resources, but also if you've got shareholders and you've got investors, you have to be able to convince them that this is a good use of funds, because innovation often fails, as John's just said. And so in a small business, that can be quite scary, and investors can be very risk averse in that situation. So learning how to prepare your case for innovation, I think, is key in protecting the funds right from the onset. Secondly, then I think you need to resource innovation. And I think the kind of individuals you bring into your business are not necessarily, in terms of profile of personality, these people are more likely to be more challenging. They're going to be outliers. They're not going to think like everybody else. They can be quite difficult to manage. Something I definitely learned in LVMH is managing creativity. It's a skill, and you've got to be comfortable with doing that, because you don't want people to agree with you and say yes to everything and follow the trends. You want people who are going to create trends, and therefore their brains will work differently. And so I look for that type of individual or individuals and put them together, and it can be difficult, but it can be amazing too. And then continue to recruit into that area. And in terms of building a culture of innovation, bringing in the younger employees as they come in and expose them to innovation from the beginning, so they can see and witness the process, and then it becomes much more organic and natural to them, and they can see how ideas start the process, but also what happens, how to take innovation through to success. And so I would say, in terms of creating a successful innovation pathway, I think you have to be able to monetize it and show that pathway. I mean, I've worked in big cannabis businesses in the last 5 years, huge, and a lot of innovation going into cannabis derivatives. And you know, I learned a lot in that process, but also having stage gate processes that are agile. And so I agree with John that it takes time, but I'm also impatient personally. So I'm also very sensitive to chat for the sake of chat and meetings for the sake of meetings around innovation. I'm a bit like, come on, let's move this, or we will miss the moment. So I think a watch out on innovation process, that we aren't just talking to ourselves and pleasing ourselves, and that we move through. And then finally, I think in terms of culture, is taking the fear out of failure. So you've got to be able to showcase the wins, 100% and be proud of the wins and own the wins, but you've also got to pick apart the fails with just as much effort and passion, and everybody who is involved in that process not to feel, in any way that this is a criticism or personal fail, because you have to have risk takers in your organisation.
Thank you, Anna. And again, for those listening, apologies that there was a bit of feedback, and but I hope you got the same nuggets as I did from what Anna was saying. Thank you for that. Helen, if I could bring you into the conversation. We've talked about culture, but in terms of assessing opportunities, John talked about market orientation. Obviously, if you could unpick that from your experience when consulting with the companies that you have, how do you look at the opportunity? How do you identify the innovation worth pursuing?
I think if you're working strategically, and I'm going to be really honest here, we're not always working strategically. It's not unusual still to get given an innovation from operations or from R&D, and they say, can you make consumers want this, please? It's still not unusual to have that. But if we're kind of looking strategically, we tend to, I think it needs to be embedded in just the ongoing work that everyone's, rather than go, this is our innovation moment, now let's start looking. It should be that constant attention to shifts in consumer behavior, and that constant, there's an innovation opportunity here. And that's what I've seen works really, really well. So that constant look for evidence of shifting of consumer demand in every piece of consumer understanding work that you're doing, whether it's a one-off piece of qual or a quant equity study, to constantly be asking, is there a shift in consumer demand? And it should be that way around, not the other way around, which is, hang on, the competition have just launched that, we better catch up really fast, because it's kind of a problem if you're finding yourself just doing, they've launched that format, quick, we've got to catch up with them, which also does happen. But if you're ahead of the consumer in that way, you're seeing what's shifting, you'll also be ahead of your competition, and then not in that kind of catch-up game. And then you've got the practicalities of, can we produce this cost effectively? Are regulations going to get in the way? Have we got evidence of demand that we can make the business case to the organisation? And those are things that, are hard work, actually, because that's crunching numbers, understanding when you'll see returns, not in quarters, in years, what the strategic case is for the brand. So there's looking for the opportunities, which I think should be constant, and then there's really being prepared to dig in and do the hard work of making the case.
And thank you, Helen. And when you're making, if I could come back to you, Anna, you touched upon this a little bit. Obviously, you've made the case both as a senior marketer for innovation, and now as a CEO, you've got a unique vantage point. What are you wanting to hear now when somebody is making the case for further innovation?
I'm more disciplined today than I was 20 years ago. I've learned a lot along the way, and Helen's been part of my journey, so thanks for that, Helen. So, data, I like starting with data these days. There's a lot of it around. And so looking at the total addressable market, looking at the potential, and understanding, first of all, what we're entering into, make the case commercially to me as a CEO. But then I know also from having been the innovator that it's that sweet spot, sometimes that white space that no one's yet actually properly discovered, that because you are, as John said, close to your consumer, because you're grassroots and you're listening and you're looking at what's getting written in social media channels, you come up with something. And then I look for, how do you join the dots together between the customer's demand, their pain point, what is their struggle, how are you going to solve it? And no one else yet has got the answer, or if they have, they haven't done it well enough. And there is enough reason to believe that if you put this onto the market, that you can afford to recruit those customers to buy it. Like, how much is it going to cost to educate? Because if you found a white space and you think it's genius, but you've got to now educate everybody else, and that can be very expensive. And I have learned, actually, sometimes it's just too high, especially as a small brand. You just can't spend enough money and hit those cost per acquisition that fall within your budget. So I think, in answer to your question, there's also sometimes it's just a bit about gut for me as well. Like, there's a magic moment. You think, I'm going to back this because I've seen enough data points across enough different profiles to decide I'm going to back it. But then I would probably back it cautiously to begin with and look for signs of success before I start investing serious amounts of cash behind it.
Thank you, Anna. Helen, if I could bring you in on that question, but well, actually less so about making the case and getting buy-in, but going back to something that both Anna and John have talked about, which is aligning with business priorities. What advice have you got?
I think Russell's frozen. I think he was going on to say, what advice have you got? So I'm going to answer that question. I think what I would say is that one of the biggest issues we have, especially as publicly funded businesses, is that we're measured in quarters. And I think, as John said, innovation often needs longer than that. But I guess what I would say is that Anna's point about find a way to start small, where your risk, what you're asking the business to do is relatively low risk, is the way forward. Because and then show how you can build it up, I think, is the only way forward, actually, because we can also, technology especially allows us to experiment very easily now and to move very quickly. And so I think that's great for innovation, because it means you can put something forward to the organization that says, look, the risk at this stage is relatively low. We'll get an understanding of its potential relatively quickly, and then we can invest more cautiously, which is exactly what Anna was saying. So I don't think you always have to feel like you've got to make this case that says, this is going to turn the business around, it's going to be the big white hope for the future. In fact, it's probably better not to, but to go slowly on kind of multiple fronts. Actually, the other thing is not to bet the house on one thing. Is like, here are 3 things that we're going to get behind, and we're going to experiment behind, and we're going to move behind, and just keep the energy behind it, actually.
If only everybody was blessed, I suppose, with an enlightened CEO like Anna, and with time and the patience of management. But that is difficult, particularly in straitened economic times. We always, when presenting these kind of chats, always get questions about B2B and whether or not anything is different in B2B when it comes to, in this case, innovation, and making the case for innovation. If I could start with you, John, because currently you work at a B2B organization, is there any particular tips that you would pass on, maybe through the filter of B2B, whether or not anything's different there?
Yeah, 100%. Yes. Most of my career has been innovating B2C. So it's really fascinating to flip that and go B2B. Although, having said that, most people in B2C are still selling B2B to get to their consumers. So sometimes we've got a slightly false dichotomy, because you've often got a distributor or customer in between you and the end products. 2 main things spring to mind. Firstly, I think in B2B, we underestimate the importance of brand and building fame and doing things like that. So we tend to think very much that we'll make it and everyone will come, because we have all these killer features, and it's very much kind of, a CEO a company used to work for used to say, don't make what you can sell, don't sell what you can make, and it's that way, and that's the trap I think B2B companies fall into. They just add features that they want to do, and then they assume that people will just buy it. So I think in B2B we underestimate the fact that you need to engage with your audience, build some fame around the product, and make people aware of what you're doing. And that takes time, of course. So that's the first thing. The second difference, I think the difference in B2B, which is legit, and probably whenever we have these massive debates, as we always do about B2C versus B2B, the target is so much more precise very often. So you're often talking about very senior decision makers. You're often talking about specialism. You're often talking about buying cycles that might take a long time. There might be committees. So it's not about convincing someone to switch from a red to blue toothpaste. It might be a very big transaction where, you've got to manage through a number of stakeholders. And so you've got to think through the various needs of people that are in the buying process. And that's more complicated. And you need to think about, different needs at different points in time, and think more broadly as well. And one thing that I found really powerful, actually, in terms of innovating in B2B, is to think about partnerships that you can create. So often you can innovate by partnering with somebody else. A bit like if you're in Intel, you partner with HP to put your chip inside their computer. So thinking about having a B2B strategy where you actually leverage other people's networks, other people's fame, other people's ability to introduce you. That's something that, certainly from a System 1 point of view, we found has been really helpful when you get to the kind of go to market. So think like a B2C consumer in terms of fame building. Think carefully about the insight you're getting about who makes the decision, how they make it, where they are when they make the decision, that kind of thing. And then I found that partnerships are a great way of reaching the kind of people you want to reach. Because, with B2C, you can kind of go on TV or you can be in social and you can get to those people. It's much harder in B2B because, they're not as available as the average person walking down the high street.
Thank you, John. I mean, it seems to me a general rule of thumb is the comparison between B2B and B2C is, in some ways, the answer is that they're the same strategically, at least, and from the point of view of innovation and spotting opportunities, perhaps that's the case. But obviously, tactically, there are nuances and differences. Helen, if I could bring you in, because I know you've worked with some B2B organizations, if I could ask you to share what's worked for them previously.
Yeah, I think again, really granular knowledge of the buying process, which refers back to what John was talking about. Because I think B2B is similar to B2C, but I just think everything's harder. And I think especially in that area of the buying process, who is actually deciding, who's influencing, who's got the purse strings. And very often they're not the same person. It can be a group of people. And also very often the heart of your relationship is not with that. So often the sales relationship might be at one level, but the person or the people you need for innovations are different, and that's the challenge. And I think the other thing in B2B, which in fact I was talking about only this summer with Ericsson, they're selling 5G, is that more so than with consumers, businesses don't know what they don't know. So what they were struggling with is that a lot of businesses just don't know what the possibilities are for 5G. And it's getting in there and inspiring with the opportunities that are available to them, and then kind of building off the back of that. So I think consumers also don't know what they don't know, but I think it's really profound in business, actually.
If I can move on to, because the other common question, and it has come through today, that we often get when discussing any marketing or marketing adjacent subject is it different, or how is it different for smaller brands? Now, Anna, if I could bring you back in, I know This Works is not a small, plucky startup necessarily, but it's relatively small compared to some of the other organizations. Is there anything different that those listening that work for smaller organizations need to think about when approaching innovation, would you say?
Yes, it's always that focus on cash, always. So the cost of an innovative project, which has got risk attached, will always be scrutinized by the CEO, the CFO, because of the drain into the cash and what that would look like. So there's also a focus on, can it be capex? And these are the things that get discussed a lot in small businesses because of the impact on the P&L. So really repeating some of the things Helen said earlier about going with a reasonable proposal that is not going to, put the business in jeopardy if it fails. And so, and also something that John said. So one of the things that I would, consider is, can you do a collaboration? Can you share the risk with another brand or provider so that you can share the risk, but also share their brand awareness, share their marketing power. So in the beauty industry, collaborating with a tech business for some kind of device would make a lot more sense than the brand creating their own version of it. So that would be something that the smaller brands would think of, and then doing pilot studies before you start to invest in the bigger scale up of, for instance, if you are doing user studies or clinical studies or any science claim support, that can be very expensive. And my scientific background, you need to be able to create studies that are small enough and indicative enough to then go and convince to put more money behind for a more robust study. I also think that you need to think about international innovation, because brands today are international just by nature, but an innovation in one market will not translate into another. And big companies can consider a global innovation strategy, but small brands can't. And I think they have to be clear which market they want to win in, and then deal with that and handle that innovation right from the beginning, rather than thinking they can speak to all markets, because you get into all kinds of regulatory issues, etc., and they can be very expensive. So pick your market right from the beginning, or if and have a roadmap of, okay, if it works in this market, where will I go next? So you are looking ahead in your innovation, so you're not going to just hit a brick wall, because again, smaller businesses tend to operate with shorter horizons. But if you can extend your horizon out to 3 years, 5 years, even better, so you have an idea of where your innovation will go next. And then I always think that doing innovation which is almost limited in its availability can be useful for a small business. So that kind of sellout factor where it's gone now, but it was hugely successful. So limiting your risk at the beginning and creating hype and demand, and then be able to repeat or relaunch later down the line.
Thank you. Sound advice. And it's come up again, this question of having patience, having a long view, obviously essential when it comes to innovation. Now, John, if I could bring you back in the spirit of the adage that you can learn more from what went wrong as you can from unequivocal success stories. If I can ask you to think back over your innovation that didn't go to plan, and what you learned from it, if you could give us an example.
Oh, thanks, mate. And it's so true. I mean, innovation is inherently risky. I mean, lots of different examples come to mind for different reasons. I mean, but both big ones and small ones. I mean, the most dramatic, my very, very first innovation I got to work on, just to be clear, I was part of the team, definitely not leading it, was fruit shoots back in the day when I was a very young trade marketing manager, and I was kind of going out to all the retailers and pitching it in. And we couldn't keep up with demand for 18 months. I mean, it was just a runaway success. I'll drop that in first, just to mention that. But anyway, 15 years later, I was also working on the brand when we tried to launch this thing called Magicap, right? And the idea was it was a cap that wouldn't spill. So when your child was on the back seat of the car, spinning the bottle around, it wouldn't drop any liquid. That was a brilliant idea, and about 3 weeks before, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks after launch, a child almost choked on it, and it actually made the headlines. And we had to recall every single product, and it led to a drop in Britvix, who's the company that owned Fruit Shoot, drop in market valuation of 35% overnight. That led to a potential hostile takeover by AG Bar. That led to the CEO losing his job. That led to everyone missing their bonus and LTIPs and everything that year. Right. So that was like, now, that was like one bit of technical due diligence that wasn't done right in the process. So consumer insight was brilliant. It was millions and millions of pounds of capital that was invested in terms of molds and production, that kind of thing. But not doing the due diligence on the product itself cost hundreds of millions of pounds of shareholder value. So that's probably the most dramatic failure that I've seen up close and personal, and completely changed, a company's trajectory. So that was painful. I mean, smaller ones, one that I kind of like really upsets me to this day was Pepsi Raw. So Pepsi came up with this beautiful innovation called Natural Born Cola, and it used kind of natural cane sugar in production. It tasted absolutely wonderful. It was in a lovely glass bottle. The advertising was amazing, and I had the unfortunate job of delisting it from the company, which is just the most horrible job, to kind of do all the exiting of it, taking off all the all the point of sale from the shelves and deleting it from the system, that kind of thing. So, I did the post launch analysis on that one. And we just didn't get the consumer insight right. We took it was an innovation from the US. We thought it was brilliant, and we found out that actually cola is such a sort of a dirty, that's probably a bad word, but it's something that everyone enjoys. It's a guilty pleasure. That's the right phrase. It's a guilty pleasure. It's not a premium drink. And trying to turn it into a premium drink when you've got a mainstream brand which is a guilty pleasure is a stretch for the brand too far. Although I have to say, Russell, I wonder if we'd had more patience and had seeded it more carefully rather than going mass market from day one. I have a suspicion that there was a market for it somewhere, and that we might have done it. But anyway, we gave it 1 year. We were impatient. We'd gone to mass market. We discounted the price too heavily, and then I had the job of reversing the look, taking it out of the marketplace.
Anna, it's a difficult one to beat there. Have you got a cautionary tale from your career of something that didn't go quite to plan that you can share?
I've got so many. We could be here all day.
Sorry?
I said I've got so many. I think it's
if you well, maybe just leave it with the word.
I mean, okay, so because I'm deeply involved in product development, that's part of what I enjoy and bring into this work. So I've got two examples. So we create products using a discipline of neuroscience, where you look at how an aroma can impact the brain. And this is one of the reasons why we've had some great success with our Deep Sleep Pillow Spray. But I had this idea that in the world of wellness, sexual wellness is part of the wellness pillars. It's all a bit cringe and everyone gets slightly uncomfortable talking about it, but we do talk about it. And I wanted to, working with my neuroscientist, look at how the brain would respond to aromas in terms of arousal and seeking sexual reward. So the happy news was I could create a fragrance, and it was called Love Sleep. And we even did user studies. We asked people, so we had the brain imaging, so we knew it had an impact on the brain, but we also asked people in lifestyle, when you inhale this fragrance, how does it affect behavior? Okay. And I had studies, I had data, I was so excited. So my B2B challenge was to convince the retailer. So I made this really exciting video, and they all bought in, great, and they all bought loads of stock. And then I made a really kind of provocative video for media. First of all, Meta didn't like it because there was too much skin on show. So that was my first problem. And then my second problem was that people couldn't understand whether I was selling sex or sleep. And I was trying to sell both. Because the two things go naturally together, but it was a big fail. I think I was just a bit too soon, because had we launched now, we may be more successful. But I think my key message was I need to simplify my messaging. I had too many messages, and the consumer wasn't sure exactly what I was proposing. But that's one. And if you want another one, if you've got another minute, the other exciting fail was working with a big US celebrity. And I created a range when I was in Canopy Growth, a topical range of skincare for this celebrity. And she had very strong opinions as the talent, rightly so. I, as a scientist, had also very strong opinions because I am informed by science as opposed by popular view. And we had to make some choices around the fragrance. And I was very determined that science should win versus celebrity viewpoint. And I did railroad and it did go through, but the talent did not back it as a result. And it didn't work. So my learn from that was if you're using talent to back a product, then they better be behind it, because otherwise it will fail. Because even though they may be a contract where they're supposed to endorse, if they personally aren't behind it, it won't work. So there you go. 2 great examples of fail.
I think timing, crucial, simplicity, and on that latter example, the need for authenticity, absolutely crucial there. I'm going to ask one final question by way of summary of all of you. And if you could just identify one thing, one piece of advice that you want to pass on to those listening, what would that be when approaching innovation from all your experiences, cautionary tales as well? If there was one thing that you want to leave people with, what would that be? I have to start with one of you, so I'm going to start with John. What one nugget of advice for people?
Whoa, that's a tough one. There's so much. I want to say resilience. I'll probably go for test. I think there are so many different ways you can test innovation, like whether it's rapid prototyping. I mean, at System 1, we do an innovation test. You could use that. You get customer feedback. You can launch in a particular channel. But I think when you don't have big budgets and you don't, it's really important to try and learn and go again really quickly. So I think I remember I went from Britvic, where we used to work on 18-month time horizons, to a private equity-backed juice business, and I was given 16 weeks to launch. And it was just blew my mind. Is that you have to think completely differently. But we were able to test things so much more quickly by working with partners to develop products more quickly, design bottles in different ways, and so on. But the key is just test everything and learn really quickly, and don't wait ages. Just it's almost better to kind of test it, get out there, learn, reiterate, than it is to spend 18 months on a kind of big long-term project.
Test and test again. Key message from you, John. If I could ask you the same question, Helen, what would be your one piece of advice for people?
I think it would be, I agree with John. I think it would be, don't overestimate the power of your own brand name. I think very often we're talking to ourselves and we go, oh, they love our brand and they love us for this, so we can do X, Y, and Z. And then you find that consumers actually don't really think that. They think you're good at that thing, but you're not good at that thing. And so it's don't talk to yourself when you're thinking about the power of your own brand.
And the final thought from you, Anna.
Yeah, stay very close to your consumer target in the process, along the way, from the beginning to the end, so you understand whether you are resonating with them or not. So please yourself, a bit like Helen's point.
Thank you very much. Cogent, clear advice to finish on.